On a rainy and lonely night, I asked myself, how far would you go to escape your own demons? The storm outside roared like a fierce animal, but the real terror seemed to hide in the shadows of my own Maplewood home, New Jersey. I had decided that a quiet night would be the perfect remedy for the restlessness that consumed me, a moment to relax and forget the pressures of everyday life. But as the wind was whistled and the raindrops drummed in the windows, I realized that stillness was just an illusion, hiding something much more disturbing. The environment around me has become a character by itself. The worn sofa of the room, where I was leaning against, seemed to absorb the weight of my thoughts. The walls painted a pale tone that was once happy. Now they seemed to close themselves around me, as if they knew the secrets they kept. I had moved to that house a few months ago, seeking a fresh start after a painful separation. The memories of the past were still fresh, like the smell of a bitter coffee left in the next cup. And in the midst of these memories, a strange feeling began to bother me. The room lights began to blink, as if they were trying to communicate with me. My heart accelerated, and for a moment I wondered if the stress of modern life was finally leading me crazy. I ignored the first blink, convinced that it was just an electric failure. But when an echo of steps sounded in the hall, I couldn't deny it anymore. Sound was distinct, as if someone, or something, was moving between the shadows. What I really feared was that loneliness, which I believed to be my refuge, had become a prison. The rain intensified outside, and the drops seemed to hit more strongly, almost as if they wanted to get my attention. The echo of the steps continued, and in a moment of courage driven by curiosity, I got up from the couch and headed toward the hallway. Every step I took seemed to weigh more than the previous one, as if the house was pulling me back, trying to warn me about something I didn't understand yet. It was then that I noticed the mirror on the corridor wall, blurred by moisture. The reflected image was not just mine. There was something more, an indistinct presence that seemed to watch me. When I cleaned the surface with my hand, a shock walked my body. A strange message appeared, written with a handwriting that was not mine. "You're not alone," he said. And the truth behind these words made me paralyzed. The feeling that the house had its own stories, its own secrets, began to consume me. Memories of my childhood, the tales of terror that my grandfather told me, resurfaced in my mind. I always believed these stories were just fiction, but now, in the midst of the storm and strangeness that night, I started to wonder if there was something else. But when the night fell once and for all, something inexplicable happened. The silence of the house was broken by a deafening thunder, and the light blinked once again, this time completely fading. The darkness wrapped me like a heavy cloak, and for a moment I hesitated. The message in the mirror echoed in my mind, "You're not alone." I needed answers, but the idea of facing the stranger made me on alert. With a thrust, I searched my cell phone, but the screen shone only once before I died. Electricity seemed to have abandoned the house, and I was completely at the mercy of the storm. It was then that I heard a door opening, followed by light and hesitant steps. The heart shot and my mind began to draw terrifying scenarios. Who else could be there? That's when I remembered that there was a neighbor who had performed the week before, an elderly man named Arthur, who always seemed to observe the house with a curious look. He had warned me about Maplewood's mysteries, but I hadn't paid him much. Now it looked like it could be the key to understanding what was going on. Determined to confront the unknown, I went towards the room, where the window light still let a weak shine. It was then that I saw Arthur, his clipped silhouette, in the weak light, stopped at the door. He looked pale than the last time I saw him, and his eyes were wide, fixed on something behind me. "You must not be here," he whispered, his voice shaking. "The house doesn't like visitors." I felt a mixture of anger and fear. "What do you mean by that? What's going on?" Adrenaline pulsed into my veins, and the need for answers was uncontrollable. Arthur hesitated, his expression mixing concern and despair. "This house has a story. It's not just wood and bricks. It keeps secrets, and The demons you try to escape may be closer than you think. He stepped ahead, and his voice was firmer. You should leave while you can still. Those words hit me like a dagger, but I wasn't willing to give in to fear. What if I don't want to? What if I need to understand that? The tension between us hung in the air, palpable, like electricity before a storm. Arthur let out a deep sigh, and his eyes shone with a mixture of sadness and determination. So, you need to know that you are not alone, but not the way you think. There is something here that feeds on loneliness and pain. You may think the house is your refuge, but it is a disguised prison. A new noise echoed through the hallway, a low, distorted laugh that seemed to come from inside the walls. The dread took over me, and I looked at Arthur, seeking comfort, but he was paralyzed, watching the darkness that moved beyond us. "We need to go," I shouted, but before we could move, a shadow projected in front of us, deforming and taking shapes that challenged logic. Fear paralyzed me, and the feeling that there was something behind me, something I knew me, left me in a state of shock. Arthur pulled me by the arm, and together we ran toward the exit, but the door was locked. "It can't be," I exclaimed, my heart beating hard. The house didn't want us to leave, and the storm outside looked like a prison of emotions as dark as the ones I tried to leave behind. "I will help you," Arthur said, his determination renewed. "But we need to face it together. There is a way to appease what is here." The tension between us was palpable, and I knew I was about to enter a world that challenged everything I knew. One choice came before me: to face my demons or allow them to consume me. And as the storm roared outside, I knew the real battle was just starting. Panic pulsed into my veins as we desperately tried to open the door, but to my surprise, she didn't give in. The sound of the distorted laugh echoed throughout the corridor, and the feeling that something was approaching was undeniable. "Arthur, what should we do?" I asked, my voice coming out of anxiety. He looked at me, the expression of a man who had seen more than he should. "We need to go to the basement. That's where the key is to understand the house and what's going." And those words left me in shock. The basement? The idea of descending to that dark place terrified me, but the alternative was to be at the mercy of that unknown entity. With one last look at the locked door, I followed Arthur towards the ladder leading to the basement, the light of the flashlight he had found shaken as if he was as frightened as us. Every step we designed seemed an invitation to the abyss, and the humidity of the air made breathing hard. When we reached the bottom, the smell of rotten mold and wood invaded my nostrils. The basement was a maze of dusty boxes and forgotten objects. However, what caught my attention most was an old table in the center of the space, covered by a torn cloth. Arthur approached and pulled the cloth, revealing a large leather book, his yellow and worn pages. "This book contains the stories of the people who lived here before you," Arthur explained, his fingers shaking as he flipped through the pages. "And believe me, the house has already been the scene of many horrors." My mind spinned. How could an inanimate object carry so much pain? "But what does this have to do with me?" I asked, tempted to understand the connection. It was then that an image caught my attention. A woman with a distant look, the same expression I used to see in my own nightmares. My heart fired. She looks like me." Arthur looked at me, her eyes full of understanding. "She was one of the residents, and just like you, she also felt arrested. The house consumed her." A cold traveled my spine. I was not the first to be attracted to this place. There was a pattern, a vicious cycle of loneliness and despair that the house fed. "But why me?" I asked, trying to understand how my own story intertwined with hers. Arthur hesitated, as if he was dealing with a much larger secret than I imagined. "You're not here by chance. Your pain, your memories, they called it. The house feeds on trauma, and you carry many of them." Those words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I remembered the years of loneliness, the loss of my family, the nights I felt invisible. The house was not just a shelter. It was a distorted mirror of everything I had lived. At this point, a deafening noise echoed from behind us. and a shadow projected itself, larger and more threatening than before. Arthur looked at me, the expression of despair now mixed with a new understanding. You need to decide now. Face what is behind you or surrender to what the house wants. The weight of that choice crushed me. I was not just fighting an external entity, I was facing my own demons. And as the shadow approached, the line between the past and the present began to fade, revealing truths that I was prepared to face. What would happen if I couldn't escape? It had been roared, and I knew that the storm inside me was about to explode, seemed to feed on my fear. I was paralyzed, stuck between the impulse of running and the need to face what was in front of me. Arthur, he put himself in front of me, the flashlight shaking in his hand. You need to remember what the house represents, he exclaimed, his voice echoing in the claustrophobic space. She can't arrest you if you don't allow it. Look at the shadow and see beyond it. His words looked like a beam of light in the darkness, but I couldn't help but feel that if I looked to that shadow, maybe I was losing myself forever. The entity approached, and the distorted laugh resonated again, a sound that seemed to carry the voices of the lost souls that had inhabited that place. The shadows danced around me, forming family figures around me. I saw faces of people who had loved, who had lost, and the pain of that loss burned like acid in my soul. What do you want from me? I asked, almost in a whisper, as the tears ran down my face. She wants you to join her, Arthur said, her voice now urgently loaded. She wants you to become one of them, stuck in this eternal cycle of pain. He turned to the shadow as if challenging her. But you don't have to, you have the choice. It was then that a new figure emerged, a woman who seemed to have left the pages of the book Arthur had shown. She was the same woman in the image, with her distant gaze, but now she stared at me with an expression of sadness and worry. Don't get carried away, she murmured, her voice a distant echo as if fighting against invisible chains. You are stronger than you think. Feeling the emotional load growing, the shadow hesitated, as if they were regrouping. With an impulse, I decided to face the entity. I'm not you, I shouted, the strength of my voice surprising to myself. I won't be a victim anymore. I choose life. I choose freedom. The shadow emitted a resounding cry, a mixture of anger and despair as I stepped forward, challenging it. Arthur was by my side, his presence an ancla in the storm. Together, he shouted, and I followed him, our power combining himself like a shield against darkness. Then the lantern light began to shine more intensely, as if the house itself was responding to our call. The shadow hesitated, his form distorting into an internal struggle. I knew the battle was not only physical, but a struggle for my own essence. With one last scream, I channeled all the pain it carried, turning it into a wave of determination. What would happen next? I wasn't sure, but I knew the future depended on that choice. The confrontation between me and the house was about to reach its climax, and the only way out would be to face not only the shadow before me, but also the shadows that inhabited my own soul. The air around me seemed to vibrate, and the light of Arthur's lantern intensified, as if absorbing the energy of the battle between me and the entity. The shadow was writhing, its shapes shattering in fragments of darkness. I felt a wave of power through my body, a force that seemed to come from all the moments I had faced in life. It was not only the pain that carried, but also the memories of love, courage, and overcoming. With a last cry of determination, I channeled it all in one point, in the explosion of light that erupted from the bottom of my soul. The shadow, now panicked, began to dispose, its edges dissolving like smoke in the wind. I saw faces forming on its surface, and among them I recognized people I had lost, not in despair, but in acceptance. They were setting free, and so did I. When the light was finally extinguished, the darkness dissipated, and the house, though still dark, seemed less oppressive. The feeling of panic was replaced by deep tiredness, and I fell on my knees, the tears dripping down my face. Arthur knelt beside me, his eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and concern. "You did that," he said, his soft voice. "You really did." But the consequences were evident. My body was marked by invisible cuts and scratches that burned under the surface. Emotional scars, however, were deeper. I had confronted the shadow, but the fight had left an indelible mark in my soul. Looking at Arthur, I realized that he also carried wounds from the battle. The weight of what we had faced was still in his eyes, and then a new presence manifested itself. The woman who had appeared before, now clearer, as if he had found a piece of freedom. "The battle doesn't end here," she said, her penetrating voice echoing in the basement. "The house may be silenced, but the echoes of lost souls still remain. There is more to find out." With that, a new wave of restlessness has invaded me. What else was there in that house? What else was hidden in the shadows? Arthur and I exchanged concerned looks. We knew that freedom had a price, and that our struggle could have only started. As we raised, a subtle sound caught our attention. One of the objects in the room began to shine. A small medal that had fallen from the altar. It was a symbol I recognized from Arthur's book. "This is important," I muttered, reaching out to get it. "It may be the key to what is yet to come." When holding it, a quick view hit me. Images of a new journey, mysteries to be unraveled, and shadows that still stalled on the edges of reality. A sense of urgency took me. "We need to find out what that means," said Arthur, his voice now firm. "We cannot leave the house and its shadows dominate us again." Together we started a new phase of our struggle, aware that the consequences of our previous battle would shape what was coming. The scars we carried were not only marks of pain, but also of determination. We were ready to face the unknown, even if it meant confronting more shadows that lived in us and around us. And so we left the basement, ready to discover the secrets that were yet to come. As we held the medal, a wave of cold traveled the room, as if the house itself was breathing, eagerly awaiting what would come next. Arthur and I exchanged glances. The determination that once united us now mingled with a growing weight of apprehension. The shine of the medal throbbed with an almost hypnotic intensity, making the air around us vibrate in a dark tone. As we began to explore the other rooms of the house, every door we opened seemed to reveal more mysteries and horrors. Echoes of laughs and whispers resonated on the walls, as if the lost souls still vacant there, trapped in an endless cycle of pain. The moment when we confronted the shadow was just the beginning, and with every step we took, the feeling that something observed us intensified. In a dark room we found a dusty mirror, reflecting not only our image but also shadows that did not belong to us. As I approached, the image was distorted, and I saw Arthur, not as the friend I knew, but as a figure wrapped in darkness. The metal began to vibrate violently in my hand, and a voice echoed in my mind. "The choice is yours. Free yourself or join the darkness." Terror settled in my heart, and I realized that every step the possibility of a terrible choice became more real. I could sacrifice myself, letting Arthur escape, or could give in to darkness, dragging him with me. Time seemed to stop as the pressure increased, and the house was starting to crumble around us. With a cry that echoed around the house, I understood the terrifying truth. The darkness had never been just an enemy, but a part of me, always lurking, waiting for the opportunity to emerge. And so, with one last look at Arthur, I made my decision, knowing that by doing so, I could never be who I was again. The house filled with a deafening cry, and the world around us fell on shadows. The medal fell out of my hand, now without power, while I became one with the darkness that had always been inside me. And so, the house, now empty, was waiting for the next lost soul to dare to enter.